Adam Saruwatari Xtreme. A lot of you have had questions about the history of the 7, so I'll go through that and try and answer what I can. Originally when I bought it, it was a 1993 touring model. I love the way the RX-7 looked. I bought it after a quick test drive, but I have a bad back, and after driving it for a while, it became pretty apparent that it just wasn't going to be suitable for me to drive long distances in it without killing my back. So I started working on it and modifying it, transforming it to use on the track. And that's actually where it started, but not on the drag strip. It started as a road race car. And I tracked it at Laguna Seca, but kind of ran into some issues with all the rocks and debris causing all sorts of damage to the paint, and having to always repair things. So I learned pretty quickly that that probably wasn't the best course of action for me, as I love to have things looking nice and try and keep the best appearance possible. But it occurred to me that drag racing might be a better avenue, and that's what I started pursuing. And you all know basically the rest of the story after that. So it was converted and just kept making more and more modifications to make it go as fast as possible. Starting with the exterior, you can see here, it was originally Montego blue, but as time went on, it was transformed, and when it ended here, I used a Mazda yellow on the bottom, and BASF was nice enough to provide me with the Xtreme paint, which you see here, and at the time, it was very uncommon, very difficult to get, and very expensive, so I was grateful for that. Now we can kind of take a look around the car, and I'll just point things out. Through the life cycle of the RX-7, I went through many different various body kits, but the most important is the one that I finished on, and this is a Mazda Speed kit. Mazda asked me to run it when I retired, and of course I wanted to support them as they had supported me through my entire career. Up front, you've got the nice front nose that was completely replaced, along with, you can see the Greddy front mount intercooler. Front mount intercoolers still are just the coolest thing to me. Up on top, it had a wet lay carbon fiber hood. Truth be told, the hood is very close to the same weight as a factory hood, but it just looks cool because it's carbon fiber. At that time, wet lay was predominant, and pre-preg was only reserved for the highest end cars and high-end race cars. I still ran the factory fenders. There were components available with carbon fiber and fiberglass, but at that time the quality wasn't very good, so after doing body work and everything, oftentimes it would either weigh the same, if not more. I replaced the headlights with the REM Mamiya stationary headlights. Those of you with the keen eye can see, though, that the headlight mechanisms were actually removed to save weight. Continuing towards the back, these are the Mazda Speed side skirts. These are factory RX-7 doors, but they're not the doors that came with my 7. Mazda provided these doors, and we made modifications to make the car as light as possible. So what you can't see is internally everything has been removed as far as structural strength. We had to cut it all out with plasma cutters. We refinished the door so it still looked good, and got rid of the mirrors to increase the aero. These are not the real windows, they're Lexan, but we used the real seals to try and make them appear as factory as possible. Moving on towards the back, we still have the factory rear fenders. The roof is the same. The sunroof still functions and operates. Many of you might ask, why didn't you remove it? Put a solid plate up there, get rid of the motor, the weight. Well, without the windows being able to come down in a fire suit, it just became like an oven in there. So the easiest way to evacuate heat without having AC was to pop the sunroof. On the rear hatch, this still is a factory RX-7 hatch. This was replaced as well, and we used the tinted Lexan window to reduce weight. The rear bumper, there was really no weight savings, but it is part of the Mazda Speed kit. Almost all the components other than the hood were fiberglass. And then up on top, you have the Mazda Speed rear wing. This again comes down to one of those things where I wanted to run this wing. I love the way it looked, but we were giving up a little bit. We probably would have had better aero with a bigger wing with more downforce. So we could see that we were having some slippage at the top end. Translation, a little bit, not enough that we would actually worry about. As far as weight in the rear, Abel was always after me that I should gut the taillights to reduce weight because there was a lot of weight back there. But the problem was that I would drive it occasionally. So left everything intact and the taillights work. I used to always get asked if 552 is my lucky number, and it is not. 552 was a number that Frank Choi gave me at the Battle of the Imports. That was the first import drag race I'd ever run, and the number just stayed through my entire career. Whenever I wasn't drag racing the car, I'd always use NK wheels, Nitto tires, make it look like a street car as much as possible. That's the way I liked it to appear. The brakes, you can see, have been completely changed out. In an effort to save weight in every way possible, those are Willwood brakes that we specifically use just for drag racing. It provided just enough stopping power to do the job. Definitely wouldn't want to use those if I was going road racing. In the back, you could see that this factory RX-7 hatch, the Montego Blue we talked about, you get a nice good view of the cage from in back, and there's a carbon fiber nitrous oxide bottle, custom built battery box to meet NHRA specs. It's great to have the battery in back as well for weight transfer on the leave. We had a custom aluminum fuel cell built that is down below, and we could take a closer look at that when we look from the underside. For those of you that don't know, Abel and I have been good friends since the beginning of my racing career. And what a lot of you may not be aware of is that he deserves a tremendous amount of credit for me making it into the 8s. He actually helped me with everything necessary to use the G-force transmission, and he had his fabricator, Paul Alabab, built everything for the interior of the car. He did a phenomenal job, and since Abel was really into secrecy, he had Paul build it at his house, so no prying eyes would know what we were up to. But because of that, I am always eternally grateful to the Rotary King. We can take a look at the interior, and you can see the doors. If you listen, you can see that they're very lightweight. There's hardly anything to them. But the key is when they close. The car already sounded like a beer can, but listen to this. That's what it sounds like when they close. So that's a dead giveaway that we had cut everything out of it. But if you take a look inside, we tried to stay with the same theme and keep the factory door panels as clean looking as possible. The cage was much nicer than Solid Fix. It was still NHRA certified, but I had this nice bar that would open for easy entry and exit. Now I can show you all the different controls that I had inside the car. Sparco steering wheel, different buttons, of course, to adjust different things that I honestly can't remember what it was. On the pillars, boost gauge, EGT, also another boost gauge on the steering column. Right here I had water temp and oil temp and backup boost and EGT gauges. Now when I first started, gauges were the craze, and it's always good to have backups. But as things got faster and faster, it was difficult for me to keep track of everything. So that's where this comes in. That's a Motec dash, and you probably remember me talking about it in the NSX. It's the same thing I ran on there, but it enabled me to data log all sorts of information, which wasn't overkill, but made life a lot easier. This is the sequential shift G-force transmission. It's a 5-speed clutchless, and that was really a pinnacle part of getting into the 8s. On the center console there are all the nitrous controls. The glove box was customized so it would house more gauges. I have an air intake temp gauge there and an oil pressure gauge. The car had a turbo timer when I was using it on the street, obviously not so important for the racetrack, and I used a Rebic 3 Greddy injector controller. That was on the original setup, but once things started getting serious, JC convinced me to go to Motec, and between Abel and JC, they did the majority of the tuning on the car. A lot of it was actually done at AEM, but it got to the point where it's too difficult to make the trip down there, so I just put a dyno in here, and luckily they were nice enough to come up here and give me a hand. But you can see all the controllers are right here. I ran an M4. This plate basically housed everything, and at that time, DIS ignition controllers were very uncommon, but MSD had some prototypes and they provided them to me for experimentation. They worked out great. You can see right here, we still use the factory door panel. The cage was removable. This bar would also come out so we could access to get data log and work on anything that needed to be worked on in here. I'm sure a lot of you have questions. The G-force does not mount directly into the car. There's a lot of modifications that have to be done, and when we go underneath, I'll show you how that was done. However, from the top side, the cage had to incorporate everything. So the cage also ties in with the supports to the transmission. And a key factor, if you look back there in the car, the cage is all centered on one focal point. Those of you with a keen eye will realize that is above the rear end housing. And that is how we got the rear end housing to live through an entire race. That support goes through the unibody into a support that holds the rear end housing in place. For all of you that were asking about engine compartment shots, I didn't forget about you. It's just that I can't do a very good job. And Drew was busy wrapping up tax season. Luckily, she is all done with that, and she was able to come down here and clean up the engine compartment for me, which is a 10 times better job than I could even do myself. So, there you have it. We can take a look. And the first thing I will tell all of you is that there's nothing that is so special about my setup that you all couldn't do it yourself. I'll go through everything, and then you can make your own assessment. But starting with the engine, standard 13B. Abel and his man Rick helped train me to do the porting on the intake and the exhaust housings. The rotors are machined by Abel. They accept a 3mm apex seal, and at that time, the best thing that Abel had was the 3mm apex seals from England. In recent conversations we had, that technology is archaic, as would be expected, and he and the others are using some sort of special ceramic seal that seems to be very, very expensive. And of course, famously, Abel always tells me, you need it. However, we'll kind of see how it goes. The interesting thing being that Abel and I were discussing the other night what other parts I needed him to machine. And he said he went through his files and he sees that I bought parts just before I retired. So he believes that I possibly rebuilt this engine before I put it into storage. I don't know if that's true. I can't remember. But that would be great because that would save me a ton of work. So we'll look into that and kind of see how it goes. As far as the setup here, the exhaust manifold was a Greddy T78 exhaust manifold. Could be purchased off the shelf. The turbo was special. My friend Todd Kaneko, the turbo wizard, built me this turbo specially for me, but I've been told by Abel that turbo technology is just light years ahead now, and this is actually archaic from what everyone else uses. Of course, the discharge would go through the Greddy front mount intercooler to the intake. There was nothing special done on the intake. I extrude hooded everything just to increase flow, but that's not really the silver bullet. I mean, that's not really going to give you tons and tons of power. The main thing is that the setup just worked. As far as ignition, that's always a huge question on the rotary side. I went through tons of different types of coils. And believe it or not, what I ended up with was going back to the factory coils, using those experimental MSD DIS boxes. That setup worked great. Had no problems on the dyno with it, so we went with that. As far as nitrous, I don't remember how much horsepower we were extracting from the nitrous. We ran the Nitrous Express system, and it worked really well. For those of you that don't know, the injection, the fogger was right on the back side of the intake elbow. And we really never had a lot of problems, especially with that stuff. It was very reliable. You can see right here the evolution. In the beginning, I ran a Greddy Rebic 3 injector controller, and that was great, except really, if you want to run at 110%, you want to go with the Motec and the right injectors. I learned all that myself. You know, we used Rochester flat disc type, and then, you know, of course, we progressed to the Bosch Pinto style, and you can really see on a test bench the atomization. And, you know, when you're trying to extract everything you can, you just want to go with the best possible setup. So as you can see from that, you know, I mean, standard stuff, a lot of stuff off the shelf. HKS blow-off valves, I mean, in my fuel system, SX fuel pressure regulators. There was nothing I could tell you that I had some sort of magic setup. It's just the combination I had worked, and it ran good. Some days it wouldn't run so good as well, so it would all kind of depend. But for all of you that are wondering, that's how the setup was all done. We were always trying to save weight, and I wish I could tell you everything that we did, but I just can't remember. But I'll go over the highlights of the things that visually I see and recall. We did remove the ABS. We also removed the power steering, and actually the steering felt better with the power steering out of the car. Other things that are removed, of course, is I talked about there's no AC, and actually that was a huge argument because I love AC. But of course, in the end, to go fast, we removed the AC out of the equation as well. You heard me talk about the headlights. Now you can get a real clear view. everything has been removed. The lights, everything are gone. So all those measures were taken to save weight. I mean, if I'm looking at this today, I see that there's still a lot of factory wiring. I mean, if we really, really wanted to go for it, we'd probably want to pull all that factory wiring out and have Motec build a complete harness for the car, reduce the weight. The other thing that I recall is up here you can see where the Koni shocks are coming through the unibody. Adjustable shocks for all of you that want to build drag cars are just a necessity. They're a key. They really can be tuned, and actually these can only be adjusted on the rebound. If you get good shocks for compression and rebound, and you can computer control them, it'll make all the difference. That'll help you out a lot if you're building your own FD to go and drag race. Other than that, that's pretty much all I remember. If you guys have any other questions, then feel free to put them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer anything that I didn't cover in this overview of what's going on in the engine compartment. I hope all of you enjoyed that tour of the RX-7. We're able to look at a lot of the stuff on the top side, and hopefully I gave you some information that maybe you didn't know before you saw this. The video is getting a little long, so we'll cover the bottom side when the car is on the lift. That's a lot easier to get some good shots and for you guys to get a good view of what's going on. Until then, I'll see you next time.